Рада всех приветствовать на нашем мастер-классе. Меня зовут Анна Лебедева, я руководитель приемной комиссии Школы кино и телевидения «Индустрия». И сегодня мне выпала честь представить нашего гостя и, соответственно, нашу школу, чему я безумно волнуюсь и радуюсь. И для начала хотела бы уточнить, как меня видно, слышно. Если возможно для вас, поставьте, пожалуйста, плюсики в чат. То есть как звук, как свет. Поставьте, пожалуйста, плюсики, либо какие-то вопросы, либо дайте обратную связь, пожалуйста. И если возможно для вас, то было бы здорово, если бы вы написали, из каких вы городов. Все хорошо. Отлично. Добрый вечер. Здорово. У меня есть 5 минут такой подводки, поэтому для начала я хочу рассказать вам про киношколу, индустрию, кто мы такие, кто-то с нами знаком уже давно, кто-то нас ждал, да, вот эту серию мастер-классов и следит за тем, что мы делаем, что делает наша школа. Тем не менее, есть много новых участников, которые не в курсе, кто мы, чуть-чуть расскажу. Киношкола «Индустрия» была основана 3 потрясающими людьми. Это режиссером Федором Бондарчуком, а также продюсерами «Водорода» Михаилом Врубелем и Александром Андрющенко. И это такая школа, которую ребята создали для того, чтобы вложиться в современную киноиндустрию, в то дело, в развитие кино в России, взрастить кадры и где-то выйти нашей киноиндустрии, да, нашим кинопроизводством на некий такой более высокий уровень. И мы, конечно, очень вкладываемся в наших студентов, мы вкладываемся в кино, мы любим это дело. И, соответственно, сейчас киношкола организовывает вот эту серию мастер-классов. Их будет 12, они будут проходить каждую пятницу сейчас в течение нескольких месяцев на разные совершенно темы, для того, чтобы вы могли обучаться, развиваться, интересоваться, и, конечно, для наших студентов, в частности, мы организовываем. Что важно? И сказала про то, что мастер-классы будут проходить, следите за нами, смотрите на сайте. Более того, те, кто сегодня присутствует, вы будете получать рассылки от нас, подарки от нас в том числе. И сегодня для вас мы подготовили подарок, поэтому досмотрите обязательно до конца. Это все, что касается школы. Что касается нашего сегодняшнего гостя, да, это, конечно же, безумно волнительно и приятно, что мы нашли возможность, и Памела нашла возможность создать такой мастер-класс для нас и устроить его, и все у нас сложилось. Ну, во-первых, тема сегодня – это создание Библии телесериала, к которой непосредственно, конечно, отношение имеет сама Памела Дуглас, и она сценаристка, она автор учебников по сценарному мастерству, она автор книги «Искусство сериала». Это женщина, которая номинировалась на премию гильдии сценаристов США, а также на премию Эмми, что немалозначимо. И она также является профессором Школы киноискусства Университета Южной Калифорнии. То есть это человек, который действительно вложился в киноискусство, в эту индустрию, и пришла сюда, чтобы поделиться с вами знаниями. У нас будет регламент. Регламент такой, что час у нас будет лекция с вами, которую будет вести Памела, и, соответственно, 30 минут у нас будет на вопросы. Вопросы пишите в чат, мы их будем фиксировать, и самые интересные мы зададим Памеле, и она ответит и с удовольствием проведет с вами такой некий интерактив. В конце нашей встречи у нас будет подарок, поэтому смотрите до конца. И, конечно же, вы получите рассылку с записью. Если у кого-то очень поздно, да, и кто-то не может посмотреть, то не переживайте. Вот как-то так. В принципе, наверное, все. У нас в 21:05 должна начаться уже встреча с Памелой, мы ее ожидаем. И пишите обязательно ваши вопросы, пишите, да, будет синхронным переводом. Все, пишите вопросы, мы будем выделять лучшие, и в конце мы их зададим. Спасибо большое. Памела.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm going to talk to you today about what makes today's television great and how you, students, can also create original series that will not only succeed at home, but also around the world. Because today, television is the dominant medium in all countries, and often shows that work well in one country also work well in other countries. And the reason for that is that television is based on character. The human characteristics that make anyone root for a protagonist to succeed in a quest are understandable everywhere. Now, there are particulars that I can tell you of things that you can look for in creating your own original series. And there are pitfalls that I will also warn you about. Now, after I finish talking, there'll be some time, as I suppose Anna told you, to ask questions. And I'd be very happy to add to anything that I've said or explain anything you'd like to know. Now, first of all, why is this a golden age of television? Well, part of it has to do with accessibility, that because of streaming and because we are no longer dealing with physical reels that have to be moved from country to country, a vast population gets involved in a show. Now, once again, what is it that involves you? Well, it really comes down to the writing. So let me back up for a minute and tell you one of the problems that I have been told. I don't know Russian television, but I've been told this is an issue there, as it is in many countries in Europe and elsewhere, which is the misunderstanding that directors create shows. That goes all the way back to the mid-20th century with the feeling that somehow atmosphere, cinematic qualities alone are what captivate people, and that writers are someone who writes dialogue, perhaps, or someone who may create some story and somebody else creates another story, and someone else in charge puts that together. That's not the way it works. One of the reasons that American television and also Danish television and Israeli television and other countries that have had greatly successful television series that have traveled, the reason that they are so successful is that they are writer-driven. In other words, they deal with a single guiding vision, which is embodied in the showrunner. That showrunner has a sense of the overall quest that will continue throughout all of the episodes. The showrunner also has a staff of writers, each of whom is also a writing professional. But the notion that a show should be divided where there are multiple writers in an episode is harmful. It's just as harmful as the idea that a director is the guiding light of a show. It really has to do with depth of character and embodying the voice of that character in the writer who will create all of the driving energies. So that's the overall outlook. One of the great things about television is the long narrative. And the long narrative means that instead of having a single arc, as in a feature film, that concludes in perhaps 2 hours or 90 minutes, or in some cases more than 2 hours, still it's an idea that concludes with a story. Someone wants something, someone opposes it, there is a struggle, and it ends somewhere. That is not what goes on in television. In creating your television show, there are two, you might say, principles that you want to look for. One is creating legs, and the other is creating springboards. Now, I'll tell you what those things mean. When a show has legs, you can think of it as being able to walk, actually. It means that whatever you put in that original pilot is able to continue to evolve as the show goes on, whether that's 13 hours long or 8 hours long or 100 hours long. And the challenge is how to embed your pilot with so many layers that over many, many hours, you can continue to reveal. Now, what are you revealing? It comes back to character, which is where I started. When you create your characters, you want everyone to have secrets. Now, by that, I don't mean it's some piece of news that somebody stole something or anything like that. What I mean by secrets are secrets of personality, of secrets of what someone wants, secrets of internal battles. Those kinds of things give possibilities for stories as we get to know the characters gradually over a long period of time. So that whereas in a movie, you may think of it spanning out horizontally, which means the plot, the character goes through the plot and ends somewhere, you might think of it as sideways. In television series, you want to go horizontally within each episode, but also vertically. And by vertically, I'm talking about depth of character. So that comes back to how we reveal secrets and internal conflicts over a long period of time. That's largely how you get the long narrative. The last thing you want in a pilot, and a frequent error in new writers, is that the pilot concludes. The pilot should not conclude. The pilot should not answer questions. The pilot should ask questions. And the process of that early episode is that, and I'll get back into more detail of how it's constructed later, but the process of it is that at the end, it opens instead of closes. By that, I mean, you may be going along in a story that feels in some ways like a theatrical feature or a 2-hour movie, but there's generally a twist or a surprise or the arrival of another character at the very end that leads to the next episode. And keep in mind that one of the goals of the first episode, goals of the pilot, is to make you want to watch the next episode. It really is a matter of bringing the audience forward into saying in their own minds, oh, I need to know more about that relationship. I need to know more about the journey that this character will be on. I need to know more about the opposition to this character. That feeling will make the audience want to read the next episode. And if there is no show yet, because you're only proposing it, then that feeling is useful in making a reader or a producer say, oh, I would like to see more episodes of this written because I'm curious. So that is large part of the goal of creating legs for a new series. The other word I mentioned was springboards. Springboards, you might think of it as somebody bouncing on a diving board and springing into the dive, or anything that pushes action forward. For springboards in episodic series, we also want to embed in the pilot a suggestion of what will promote or propel each next episode. That means that there's some sort of structure. Now, one of the easiest ways, or nothing's easy because everything is as good and strong and has as much depth as you want, but one of the most available ways of propelling individual episodes is by having a procedure. Procedurals are shows that have a case that starts each show. Common examples might be a medical show, for example, where there's somebody with an illness each week and a doctor has to solve that. Or a police show, somebody commits a crime and a detective or police needs to follow that up and catch somebody. Or a lawyer show where your main character, your continuing cast, is an attorney, and that person has a case brought to them each week. Those are just 3 examples. There are more kinds of examples besides that. Now, you don't have to do that. Currently, some of the most successful shows are combinations, so that there might be a procedural base for it, a procedural structure, so that each episode going forward would have a case or a disease or a crime or something that pushes the action forward. But at the same time, you have depth of character in your continuing cast. There are many, many fine examples where that is done, because most shows now are hybrids. There are very few shows that are simply procedurals, but it can be good to lean on them. If you watch any American television, you could look up a medical show called House, which is no longer on the air. Dr. House is a doctor, and there was in every episode a case that started the journey or the story of that particular hour. But at the same time, Dr. House had lots of personal problems, and you would investigate that. There's another, there are so many examples, but I'll just give you one more. These are American shows. You may not have access to them, but you probably can find them. There's a show called The Good Wife. These shows are no longer on the air, which means that they're easily available on Amazon or Netflix or some other service. The Good Wife was a legal procedural in a way, because the main character does have a case that week, but it was many layered. It was also a family drama because there were issues in her family. It was a romantic drama because there were also, there was romantic possibilities and storylines. It was a political drama because this main character's husband is a politician. So all of those procedural elements were at play, but the reason you don't get lost is that they're rooted in a central character. Now, let me address a few other, I just want to complete my thought on springboards. When you have no procedural element say, for example, in a family drama or in a romantic drama, it's a little more difficult to find what propels each individual episode, but you can find that within the relationships. And that comes back to people with hidden agendas, with secrets, with something that they want to do as their quest. So every series is going to have an overall quest that you will embed in the pilot that will take you for the entire life of the show. Now, here are a few other ideas, and then I'm going to get to the specifics of structuring a pilot and structuring a Bible that you might create for the show. Okay, an overall concern that I have noticed that new writers have especially is that sometimes they say to themselves, oh, television sometimes has a very large ensemble cast. There are so many characters and so many storylines that the student may say, I think I should put them all in the pilot. Don't do that. What you want in your pilot is focus. Yes, you can have many other stories with many subsidiary plot lines all through your show, but your main focus in your pilot is on one person, one protagonist. Even if you are going to introduce a very large cast, you have to start by calling the audience to root for somebody's need. Now, I can give you a few examples of shows you can look up on your own that have very good pilots. One of them is Lost. I'm quoting shows that are not so new that you won't be able to access them. Lost, it was a show that began with a plane crash on an island. At the very beginning of that pilot, the focus is on the one character's eyeball. Now, you can hardly get more close than that. You are inside that character's viewpoint. That character, whose name is Jack, wakes up in a business suit in the middle of a jungle. So right away, the question is, something's wrong here. See, you want questions, not answers. Why is this man in a business suit lying in the middle of a jungle? The action takes him out of that jungle to a beach where it looks like everything is very, very peaceful and safe. We're still in his point of view. It's not until he turns and we see people screaming, and he runs towards the plane crash. Here's another little device that's often very useful. Physical action from the main character, drawing us forward into the action. We're still within his point of view. As he reaches the crash site, he sees many characters that will become stories of their own later in the series, but we were only with him. And that helps us to not be confused. It's a good way to approach a very complex kind of story. Give you another example. These are shows you can find on your own at some point. There's a series, and these are all American. I apologize for that, but they're good examples to learn from. There is a show called Orange is the New Black. It's a show about a women's prison. It starts with one character who is the least likely person you would think to end up in a prison. It takes us minute by minute with her and her fiancé as she is going to be put in this prison. But we are embedded solely in her consciousness. Then we go through very slowly taking us so we live through the process vicariously of what it would be to be in her shoes. We go into this world, which is a world that is foreign to her, and that's a very useful tool, because if our guide character is in a world that is new to her or him, then it helps the audience get used to a world that is new to them as well. Once this character gets into this prison, there are dozens of characters. As the series goes on, many of those other characters will have storylines of their own, and we can actually drop out or minimize the one that brought us into the story, but we need to start with one. And that's a piece of advice I would give all of you. Also, not everything is in the pilot. You don't want to stuff it, because think about an hour. If you really had, say, 2 or 3 minutes per episode in the hour, I'm sorry, 2 or 3 minutes per scene within the hour, then you're only going to have something like 25 things going on. So as you plan it, if you're up on 50 things happening, that's not a pilot. That's I don't want to use a bad word. I was going to say that's just like throwing up everything that would be later in the series. You don't need to do that. All you need to do is get us engaged. So that's how we proceed to care about somebody, and then you can care about someone else, and then you can care about someone else. So don't worry about it. You might have 13 hours or 36 hours or 100 hours to explore all this. You don't need it all in the pilot, but you do need everything on screen. And that's another cautionary tale that I would share to all of you, that make sure you're not so much inside the character's head that we are not seeing what the action is. Remember, on screen, unless somebody says it or unless we see it, we don't know it. It's not a novel. That said, some great current writing has been compared to novels because in serialized drama, we do have so much that's going on in terms of an internal life. One way of dealing with that, and you have to be careful of it, is by having a narrator or voiceover. I caution against that in many cases because it is a way to avoid actually dramatizing things. However, there is a time and place for a voiceover or a narrator. If you do that, be careful that it is not simply describing what we would otherwise see. A good way to do narration is by having it be the opposite of what we're seeing. In other words, we have an unreliable narrator. And that means that what we're seeing is something the character is denying. And that can be interesting if it's not confusing. Now, I'm going to move to a few other things. One is a cautionary tale about what in the West we call soap operas and what is otherwise called telenovelas. And these are dramas that air every day rather than once a week. Sometimes they're a half hour, sometimes they're an hour, where unfortunately the writing task is split up. And that weakens the storytelling because it weakens the possibility of being able to have one guiding voice or vision. A mistake that is often made in those shows, and I think that it sometimes happens in Russian shows too, if my research is correct, is that a producer who may or may not be a writer creates an outline for what the story would be in that particular episode. It is then farmed out to a variety of writers who write on all sorts of shows where nobody has pride of authorship and nobody has the overall look and feel of the show because someone has just been told to write dialogue for those characters. It may or may not fit with a long-term development of that character. And it's always a mistake. It always weakens the ability for an artist who is the writer to be able to conceptualize an overall story and feed into it with all of the elements. I hope you don't find yourselves with those kinds of jobs because they're demoralizing and they also don't tend towards quality writing. Now, see a few other things I can tell you here. I'm going to go on to how you structure a pilot and how you structure a Bible. And then we'll open this to your questions, and I'm very happy to answer anything you might have. In approaching a pilot, you often want to start with a dramatic teaser. A teaser is the material on screen that runs before titles. Now, teasers aren't always used because one of the qualities of television is that people can change the channel. And if you want to keep them, some shows do away with titles, and instead of that, simply jump right into the midst of the action in Act 1 and run the credits over the action while Act 1 is happening. But teasers can be really useful, and they can be useful in the original script, even if they are going to ultimately be edited to run through the show. In procedurals, sometimes the teaser is the basis of the investigation that will follow. There was an American show some years ago called The X-Files, and The X-Files dealt with paranormal phenomenon. And the teaser was always something intriguing that would be discovered, evidence of an alien encounter or some oddity that had occurred somewhere. And the teaser in that show never had the main cast. It would run as the basis of what the investigation would be, and the main cast would come in at the top of Act 1 to say, oh, I have discovered this phenomenon or whatever it is, and then the rest of the show investigates it. That's not the only way to do a teaser. Some teasers simply put you into the world, and it reminds you of the environment that the story will be told in. For example, there was again, I'm quoting shows from a while ago because maybe they're accessible to you, a comedy called Cheers that took place in a bar. And every episode of that show started with a vignette that was in the bar that reminds us of the world and of the characters and the tone and the feel of the show. Then after that teaser, the main character or the question of the episode would then be introduced. Or you could really just start out with your main character's need right away in the teaser. After that, you want to make sure that you are structuring your pilot in a rhythm that will continue to turn the story. One of the mistakes that I sometimes see, especially among people who have learned feature filmmaking or people who have grown up with the auteur idea of a director being in charge, one of the mistakes I sometimes see is building an awful lot of atmosphere or an awful lot of backstory or too much time spent on environment. And you really want to get into Act 1 with a problem, sometimes called an inciting incident, right away. So there is no before, there is no background, there's no, you may, if you use a flashback, and that's another whole conversation, but if you use a flashback, you want to make sure that it's fully integrated in the question or the arc of the story. In Act 1, you will lay out the quest or the problem or the question or the difficulty or the challenge. And Act 1 usually ends with a reversal. By the way, I'm using an act structure to talk about this. The traditional act structure in American television is a teaser plus 4 acts, or a teaser plus 5 acts. The truth is that in much current drama, such as what you'll see on Netflix or Amazon, there are no visible act breaks. The act break structure was originally created to accommodate advertising that would occur every roughly 13 to 15 minutes. Many shows don't interrupt with ads anymore, especially on streaming. But the structure is a useful one to think about because you do want some bones to the process of the action. So if you do it with teaser plus 4 or teaser plus 5, you can write it that way in your original draft and then just drop out those act breaks if you are presenting it to something that has no ads. Now, so I'm going to talk as if we are in act structure. At the end of Act 1, you will have started the quest and there's a reversal, something of a cliffhanger right away, so that roughly 15 minutes in or 18 minutes in, there is something that says, oh, I thought this character was going to win or succeed in this, and I see there's a problem. It's not going to work. Or what I thought was the issue is wrong. In Act 2, in a traditional structure, we see the rise of the antagonist. In other words, whatever was the problem or character introduced at the bottom of 1, we now see fully developed a second character. Now, be careful always that your antagonist is of equal strength to the protagonist, that this character should be interesting. The motives need to be completely full so that nobody is the bad guy. Everybody is proceeding from what they want, which if you were in their mind would be completely valid, even if an outsider might say, no, that person shouldn't want that, but they do want it, and we need to understand why. In Act 3, we have the collision between the protagonist and the antagonist and whatever other characters you have, so that at the end of Act 3, you might think of the character being tied to the railroad tracks and the train is coming. So it looks like there is no way out of this predicament. Another way to look at this, if you don't have action, is that whatever the character wanted at the beginning of your pilot, it appears the character is going to lose that at the bottom of 3. Act 4, if you were just going to be tying this up, you would have a resolution. But because it is a continuing television series and not a feature film, we want the opposite of a resolution. What we want instead is, yes, the character is no longer tied to the railroad tracks and is pursuing whatever that goal or desire is. However, by the time we're at the end of Act 4, there is yet another element altogether that opens up the entire series to go perhaps in a different direction that you might not have expected, so that there are many open questions at the end of the pilot. Now, I'm going to move from that, and I can, again, clarify much more of this if you want to ask questions later, but I don't want to run completely out of time here. So I'm going to move to how you might construct a Bible. A Bible is really just a proposal for the show. If in the early stages, if it's in the hands of a writer, it is something that you are going to construct. You're going to write it. You might also have some visual elements if those are useful. Another use of the term Bible is if a show is continuing and the showrunner is writing a guide for future writers, directors, and even actors to follow as they proceed with the show. So it is both a proposal, which is also called a format sometimes, and it is a guide for the future of the series. As someone creating this from scratch, from the very beginning, what you want to do in your Bible is, first of all, create what's sometimes called an overview. So the first pages, and it should be, a presentation Bible at the beginning should not be long. We're not asking you to write the novel, although, by the way, many series are based on books. And one way into a television series, especially if you're not already a credited writer, is not to go ahead and try to create your series, but instead write the underlying book. But let's assume you're creating it without a book. Your first pages would contain, first thing is the log line for the series. Now, this is not the same as the log line for the pilot. The log line for the pilot tells the story of the pilot from beginning to end, and presents the main question of it as well as the main characters. The log line for a series is not limited to your pilot. So in the log line, you would give us the world, the main characters, the main quest, and some sense of how you are going to do that. And this should be able to be done in a sentence or two. If you have what's sometimes referred to as A, B, and C stories, or A, B, C, D stories, each one of those is pegged to one of the main characters. And so you may want to break that out and say, character 1 will pursue this goal only to be challenged by that. Character B will evolve to cope with this or this challenge, and you go on with the other characters. And all of that is within a context of the world. Now, let me get to world here. After you finish this 1 or 2 sentence log line, we're going to go to the overview. The overview will speak about the world, all of the main characters in a small version, the look, tone, feel of the show. It may also include any special qualities it has if you've got special effects or whatever you're going to need. And it may also refer to some backstory if it is historical drama, for example. Now, what do we mean by world? World might be location, especially if that's important to your story, but world is more than that. It's also the kind of expectations that your characters will encounter. So in the example I gave you of Orange is the New Black, yes, it is the world of a women's prison, but it is also the world of these characters and what they are struggling with. In the case of, going back to ones I mentioned, in Lost, which I mentioned was this plane crash on an island, yes, the world is this island, but it's also what the characters are dealing with in terms of coping with their past life. In House, which I mentioned, yes, it's the world of a hospital, but every hospital is different. House is different from Grey's Anatomy, which you may know, where the tone is light and romantic. And House, it was serious medical issues. So the world is not, or if you had a world that was on a different planet, for example, yes, you might say the world is Mars, but what part of Mars are we really talking about? Are we talking about the habitat? Are we talking about something in the future where people have settled? Are we talking about early explorers? So world is a bigger concept than location. Now, once we do that, in terms of tone, feel, atmosphere, you want to be specific. If you've got a light romance, say so. If this has some comedy elements, then your Bible should reflect that. Is there something funny in the way you're writing it? So this is not an academic essay. This is a way to engage the reader into the sense of the show, more than it's a matter of outlining specifics. Okay, so that's the tone, feel, style, the world, and then we want to take in your overview, we're still in the overview, which is only about a page and a half, simple log lines for each of the main characters. Now you may find that you're going to have ultimately 14 characters, as Lost did. You're not going to put those all in your overview or even in your Bible. You're going to choose, especially in the overview, the top 3, your main character, the main antagonist, somebody else that leverages your main character. If you're going to have a larger cast, there's a great show called The Wire, which I don't know if you've seen that there. It is a brilliant show, and the Sam is nodding yes. A brilliant show that is sometimes been called a novel on screen. And what David Simon, who created The Wire, did to make it clear in the Bible was he broke out this huge cast into categories. So he would have a category of the drug dealers. He would have a category of the cops. He would have a category of, I forget all the categories, but if you're going to have a very large cast, you might create them in components so that it's not confusing. Now, again, we're just talking about summaries here. And then finally, at the bottom of your 1.5-page overview, you're going to try to intrigue your reader to wanting to turn the page. What is it that makes this special? By the way, you also may have, and it's chancy, so you decide if you want to have what's sometimes called comps. In other words, comparison shows. This one meets that one, High Noon on the Moon, or I'm trying to think of something you might know. If there are shows that are familiar to your audience and it's a little similar to something, you can mention that without ever seeming to imitate. It's not that you want to do a version of something somebody already saw. So you really want to be careful with the comparisons, but if it helps to make it clear that this is, for example, a doctor show that's like that other doctor show, you know, but it's different because we will be doing these things, then that might be a useful thing to mention. And if you're going to do that, it would be early on in your overview so that your audience is oriented to the kind of show you have. Now, after your overview, the next thing that goes on in the Bible are the characterizations. You may want to take a full page for the one main protagonist. Again, that protagonist can change, it can grow, but you want to start people with enough of an understanding of your focus character so they are rooting for that person. Be careful, and here's a common mistake, be careful that you do not write things that cannot be seen on screen. Yes, of course you can refer to something that happened earlier in this character's life if it's going to impact what the character is going to do. But unless you are going to actually show that backstory in a flashback or in some other way, be wary of it, because what we want to know is what we are seeing about this character, not their biography, not that they were born and where they went to school or anything like that, if that's not going to function. It's more difficult to describe a character in present terms than to tell their history, but that's what you have to do. That's the task here. After you finish with your main focus character, I would then go to a half page each for your next very important characters. And the next one to talk about is the primary antagonist. You may also, and you have to have all the motivations and everything we're going to see about them and why we care. And remember, just because somebody is the antagonist, it doesn't mean that you cannot understand why they're doing what they're doing. We have to believe they're doing what they're doing because nobody is just a cartoon. Okay, next, after that, you might have what are sometimes called intermediary characters, those who either oppose or enable your character, and those who will have storylines on their own, even if those are not visible yet in the pilot. So we know that we're going to see some characters' full story, maybe starting in episode 3 or even in the second season. But we want to talk about them if they're important. After you finish with these few characters, and now we're a few more pages in, you want to do a summary in your Bible of the pilot episode. And again, this is just short. This is really just a summary because you should be attaching the entire finished pilot script. But sometimes people may want to see what they're going to look at before they actually read it. And that is literally something that could go less than 3 pages. It's kind of a treatment. It's a very short treatment of the pilot. Once again, aiming not just to give the outline. We don't want an outline of it here, but we want the intriguing elements that will pull people forward to want to read the pilot and present the most attractive elements of it. After that, there's a final or next to final part which is you're going to have a list of, and these are just log lines, these are not whole episodes written, of perhaps 10 or 13 or some small number of later episodes. The point of that is not necessarily that you're going to completely tell those stories, but that you give a producer or studio or whoever or network then the sense that this is not a feature film, that this doesn't end, that there is a way forward for the entire series. And that answers the key question of the Bible, which is, why is this a series and not just a movie? And that is a very big challenge. And that is answered by a list of stories that come from your characters and that come from your pilot. After you finish that, and again, we're just maybe a page or so, this is not long. After that, if you have some reference material, especially if it's a historical drama or there's something technical about it, scientific, whatever it is, you might want to include those references briefly. Again, we're not talking about writing a tome here. We're looking at, okay, I see something there that we have, it says 10 minutes until, I think 10 minutes until we are going on to the questions from you, or less than 10 minutes. So I'll conclude by saying that at the very end, telling the producers that there is research material gives them confidence that there is a way to do the show. Many shows have research components, whole rooms of people whose whole job is to come up with future storylines based on something that they will discover. And that is especially true of medical shows and legal shows, where going forward in creating the entire show, storylines come from sometimes a real factual basis. So I think that is a big overview here. And at this point, I'd like to answer any questions that you may have. So I guess we just turn it over to Sam here, who will relay your questions to me.
Pamela, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, wonderful. So let's start. There are lots of questions, honestly. Очень много вопросов. So what genre is the most popular for the TV series now, or will be in the next few years?
Right now, what is happening, I'm trying to answer this globally, because there's a difference between what's happening on the American market and what's happening globally.
Я постараюсь как-то глобально ответить на этот вопрос, потому что есть определенная разница между тем, что происходит на американском рынке, и тем, что происходит во всем мире.
In the American marketplace, we are seeing a family drama in a context of a challenge.
In the context of a challenge.
Of a challenge. I'll give you an example.
В американском рынке, например, популярны сейчас семейные драмы, которые бросают семье какой-то вызов. Приведу пример.
Okay, an example of an American show is there's a show called Ozark, and this is a family that runs into difficulties and has to move to a part of the country which is completely unfamiliar to them, and they are shocked by that world. So it's what's called a fish out of water. There's another one similar a show called, is a comedy called Schitt's Creek, with a family that was very, very, very wealthy that loses everything and has to move to this terrible town and adjust to a very different culture. Those are examples of things that are happening right now in America. And then you translate that, and then I'll come back to the global.
В качестве примера приведу два сериала. Один из них это «Озарк». В сериале «Озарк» мы видим одну семью, и эта семья начинает жить в штате, в месте, которое им совершенно непривычно. Им приходится столкнуться с местной культурой, с местными жителями, которые представляют собой совершенно людей другой породы по сравнению с теми, кого они привыкли видеть в большом городе, где жили раньше. Это типичная история, которая бросает персонажа из привычной ему среды в совершенно непривычную. Второй пример — это сериал «Шиттс Крик». То же самое, берется семья, и она перемещается в какой-то мир, который ей совершенно чужд, он пугающий, он страшный, и им приходится с этим вызовом справиться. То есть семья, стоящая перед вызовом.
Globally, and also in the American market, I'm seeing a lot of historical dramas that are very richly produced.
По всему миру, если говорить, то есть мы сейчас поговорили про Америку, если поговорить про весь мир, то в мире популярны исторические драмы с большими бюджетами.
Even in these big historical dramas, the focus has to be on individual characters who are living through this drama. There are two ways to do it. One is you take, well, you want to translate that first?
Yeah. Но даже если мы говорим об исторических драмах, все равно мы должны рассказывать историю, показывая конкретного персонажа, который эту историческую драму проживает. Приведу пример.
There are two points of view that are often used with this. One is to come from the royal family or the powerful family and tell their story of adventure. The opposite side, which is at least as compelling, maybe more so, is to come from the life of an ordinary person caught up in this extraordinary world.
Есть примеры сериалов, где, например, рассказывается о каких-то значительных исторических событиях с точки зрения правящих семей. То есть один из персонажей является представителем королевской династии, например. А второй вариант, возможно, даже более убедительный, возможно, даже более интересный, это показать обычного человека, которого каким-то образом вовлекает в историю, связанную с историческими значительными событиями.
A good example of these large shows is Game of Thrones. I don't know if you probably have that there.
Yeah.
Game of Thrones is fantasy, but it feels real, even though there's no actual time and place, because again, we are so invested in the characters, beginning in the pilot.
Один из примеров, который хочется привести, это, конечно, «Игра престолов», который в строгом смысле не является исторической драмой, потому что это фантастика, фэнтези, но мы настолько подключаемся к главным героям, мы настолько следим за их судьбой, мы настолько в них верим, что погружаемся в это повествование и следим за ним, как будто оно настоящее.
By the way, be careful of a fantasy action adventure because things that work in movies work very differently in television. You want to say that first?
Хочу вас предупредить, будьте осторожны с этим жанром. Фэнтези, боевики, какие-то, да, фантастические. Это очень будьте аккуратны, потому что часто то, что работает в кино, работает на телевидении совершенно по-другому. То есть чисто на экране это смотрится совершенно другим образом.
Although it's true that Game of Thrones had flying dragons and huge battle scenes, people were very much invested in the lives of these characters who are real people, even though they may be royal in some way.
Да, в «Игре престолов», конечно, были огромные огнедышащие драконы, конечно, там были огромные баталии на много тысяч сражающихся, но зрители в первую очередь следили именно за человеческими взаимоотношениями, потому что, когда они смотрели этот сериал, они верили, что да, вот эти люди очень похожи на настоящих людей. Я понимаю, почему они себя так ведут, и зрители подключались именно к их историям.
And for genres, I would advise you not to worry too much about trends, because trends change. The only way to succeed is honesty with the story you have to tell.
И в целом хочу предостеречь вас от того, чтобы следить за трендами, потому что тренды приходят и уходят, они постоянно меняются, вы за ними никогда не угонитесь. А то, что всегда работает, это честная история. То есть пытайтесь честно рассказать вашу историю. Это самое главное. Okay.
Another question?
Yeah, there are dozens of those. The question is, what do you know about Russian film? Have you watched any Russian movies?
Well, Russia is a very interesting place for film historically. I don't know what's on Russian television right now, but I can tell you that that great Russian dramas began cinema worldwide. As a matter of fact, television was invented by Russians. I don't know if you know that. The word television comes from a French translation, but the technology for television is Russian, which is why it's so surprising that Russian television has not kept up with its great cinematic past.
Был вопрос, что вы знаете о русском кино. Ответ Памелы был такой, что у России замечательная киноистория, и здорово очень, что именно русские изобрели телевидение, и даже само слово television — это французский перевод русского слова дальновидение. Наверное, это, скорее всего, вот термин Зворыкина, да, был. И очень странно, говорит Памела, что Россия, начав весь этот тренд, не угналась сейчас и немного подотстала в телепроизводстве своем. Okay. So the next question is Bible used only for TV series, or should the franchise movies also use a Bible?
That's an interesting question, because many movies have multiple parts now. And I think what's been happening in movies is that the first movie has to succeed, and then somebody tries to figure out how to make more of them because of the success. But there's no reason you couldn't do a Bible for multiple movies.
Да, сейчас действительно очень часто... был вопрос, давайте скажу по-русски. Вопрос такой: Библия нужна только в сериалах или нужна ли она для фильм-франшиз? Ответ такой, что да, действительно, сейчас много фильмов снимаются во многих частях, но часто опираются на первую часть, на успех первого фильма, чтобы решить, снимать дальше фильмы из этой серии или нет. Поэтому, в принципе, если доходит до того, что фильм становится франшизой и он развивается, то почему бы и нет?
I'm going to add to that. the reason that Bibles are needed for television is because it's so much longer than feature films. Even if you had 3 episodes of Batman or something, or 6 episodes of something, that's not as large as a television series that may go on for 5 years. So you need a map for the series that you may not need for a movie.
Имеет смысл объяснить, зачем вообще Библия нужна. Дело в том, что Библия необходима в первую очередь для телесериалов, потому что они просто дольше, они просто длятся несколько лет. Да? Даже если у вас есть 3 или даже 6 серий фильмов про Бэтмена, вы их, в принципе, все можете в голове удержать. Если мы говорим о сериале, который должен жить 3 года, 5 лет и так далее, то нужна уже Библия. Библия в этом случае выступает как карта определенная, на которой можно легче ориентироваться всем, кто участвует в процессе. Okay, thank you. The next question is, what are the how is the mini-series Bible special? Is there anything, we need to know about those formats? Вопрос, чем отличается Библия для мини-сериала, каковы особенности?
That's a good question, because one of the current trends, you might say, is to limited series. Mini-series is not a term people use anymore, but limited series are. And a limited series is something that's usually 6 to 8 hours. The Bible is exactly the same. It's almost, you might almost think of it as a combination of the qualities of a feature film with the qualities of a TV series.
Да, Библия для мини-сериала ничем не отличается от Библии большого сериала. В принципе, то же самое. В Америке это называется ограниченный сериал, да, limited series чаще всего. И обычно это сериал, который длится 6-8 часов в целом. Библия пишется также, по тем же самым принципам. Окей.
One more thing. One of the reasons that limited series exist and sometimes stop being limited really has to do with the conceptualizing it as something that is enclosed. The problem, or a good problem, that happens is that when a show like that runs maybe 6 hours is tremendously popular, the producer then has to come back and figure out how to give it legs that didn't exist. It's an interesting challenge.
Еще Памела сказала, что мини-сериал — это что-то на пересечении сериала и полного метра, и сказала про интересный вызов, интересную проблему, которая возникает перед создателями мини-сериалов, проблема успеха мини-сериала. Если мини-сериал становится успешным, то после этого продюсерам приходится решать вопрос, как этот сериал продлить. То есть многие хотят продолжить этот сериал и продолжить рассказывать историю, которую автор закончил в конце первого и единственного сезона, как планировалось. Okay, so let's go on, I guess. The next question is, what are the main pitfalls for beginning screenwriters when writing a pilot?
The first one is crowding your pilot.
The first one is what? Once again?
Crowding the pilot with too much.
Да, был вопрос, какие основные ошибки допускают начинающие сценаристы, когда пишут пилот. И вот Памела как основную ошибку выделяет, когда толпа персонажей сбегается в один пилот, и там становится слишком много действующих лиц.
The second one is, in addition to having too much story in the pilot, having too many characters or lack of focus on what the audience is supposed to care about.
Вторая ошибка, связанная с этой, это слишком много историй, слишком много сюжетных элементов, поворотов того, что происходит. И в ситуации, когда у вас слишком много вот этих сюжетных элементов и слишком много персонажей в вашем пилоте, зритель совершенно не понимает, за кем ему следить, на ком ему сфокусироваться.
Another is not getting into the action quickly enough. And this comes from a background of theatrical features where people are stuck in a dark theater for a long time. No one has the patience to sit and watch atmosphere for 10 minutes. You have to start your pilot, you have to start your story earlier.
Другая частая ошибка – это слишком долгий путь до, собственно, сюжета. То есть времени на раскачку у нас нет. И если раньше, когда люди приходили в кинотеатр, они готовы были сидеть полчаса и никуда бы они не ушли, то сейчас зритель очень легко переключается на другой сериал, переключается на другой канал. И сейчас действие должно начинаться как можно раньше. То есть не затягивайте с началом действия вашей истории.
And finally, a common mistake is to conclude the pilot instead of opening the pilot. And this is, again, a habit that comes from feature films, that it has to open instead of close.
Третья частая ошибка, которая постоянно встречается, это закрытый пилот. То есть когда у вас в пилоте та сюжетная линия, которую вы начали, завершается. Это тоже ошибка, которая корнями уходит в то, что многие учились на полных метрах, многие учились на законченных историях, на пьесах и так далее. В пилоте история должна открываться в конце пилота, она должна задавать новые вопросы, она должна требовать дальнейшего разрешения в следующих сериях.
One more thought is that good writing will always work. And that means avoid exposition. Expository dialogue is the death of writing. So if you're a good writer, you can get away with a lot.
Еще один момент, это если вы пишете хорошо, то ваша история сработает, конечно. Но вот часто очень ошибка, которую допускают именно начинающие, неопытные сценаристы, это излишняя экспозиция. Слишком много экспозиции в противовес действию. То есть, когда вы объясняете какую-то предысторию или объясняете, почему персонаж поступает так или иначе, и ничего не происходит, по сути, это очень тяжело сделать. Опытные сценаристы с сильным голосом, сильные авторы могут это сделать, но начинающим это бывает сложно. Okay. So yeah, here is the next question actually. How do we describe the establishing scenes, I guess, in a show? How do we describe, maybe what they meant is exposition. How do we write exposition, I guess? Как описывать подводящие сцены в сериале? Вопрос.
I would avoid it altogether. I think you need to be alive inside the situation. Don't worry about facts. The facts should be obvious on the screen. So don't write at all.
Да, смотрите, вопрос не совсем однозначный, да, подводящая сцена, что вы имеете в виду. Я перевел как экспозиционная сцена, и ответ на этот вопрос такой: не пишите экспозицию. То, что у вас должно происходить вне зависимости от фактов, которые знают зрители. Это должно работать без этого. То есть ищите такие варианты, чтобы долгая экспозиция, долгие объяснения и подводки вам были просто не нужны. Это затягивает историю. So the question is, do major studios look for outlines, synopses, or should I send them the written pilot scripts?
Pilot script. You can add to that pilot script very, very short Bible or summary, but it's all the quality of the writing itself.
Вопрос был, нужны ли крупным киностудиям заявки синопсиса или лучше отправлять готовые сценарии пилотов? И ответ, что, конечно, нужно отправлять сценарии пилотов. Если вы хотите, вы можете приложить к этому сценарию короткую Библию, но всегда решение будет приниматься, основываясь на вашем сценарии, собственно, на тексте, который вы прислали. Okay. The question is, can you shoot a successful TV show with a bad script or a not successful TV show with a good script? Вопрос, можно ли снять успешный сериал с плохим сценарием или неуспешный сериал с хорошим сценарием?
Well, a bad script cannot be overcome by any special effects or fancy lighting or anything, or even good acting. But can a good script be ruined? Sure.
Ну да, тут простой ответ, конечно. Хороший сценарий, давайте так, плохой сценарий невозможно победить. То есть если вы на площадку съемочную приходите и у вас сценарий плохой, то какие бы замечательные актеры не были, какие бы спецэффекты вы потом не добавили к этому, история не будет работать. Сценарий плохой, ничего не получится. Но можно ли хороший сценарий на площадке загубить? Легко. Okay. So the question is, what is the optimal number of characters in a show, in an 8-episode show?
I recommend in the early planning not more than 6 to 8 characters altogether. Now those are main characters. You may have smaller parts that don't go in the list of the Bible.
Вопрос был такой, какое оптимальное количество героев в сериале из 8 серий? Ответ такой, что не нужно разбивать сеть ваших персонажей больше 6-8 действующих лиц, и это основные самые. Да? Конечно, у вас там могут быть и другие персонажи, менее значительные, но уж в Библии точно нет необходимости всех их расписывать.
Give an example. There's a show, a current limited series called The Queen's Gambit that actually includes a visit to Moscow. It's about a chess player, and we are always in the mind of this young woman who is a chess player. There are various characters that she meets, but it's all about her.
Даже если привести в пример сериал «Ход королевы», действие некоторых сцен серии, из которого происходит прямо в Москве, мы можем заметить, что она встречает по пути большое количество совершенно разных персонажей, но при этом всю историю мы наблюдаем ее глазами, то есть через нее воспринимаем то, что происходит. То есть все очень сфокусировано. Okay. The question is it possible to not establish the antagonist in the pilot? Вопрос, можно ли не заявлять антагониста в пилоте?
No.
Нельзя.
One of the you asked about problems that new writers have. Somebody asked that, and I think not having enough opposition or conflict is a common problem. So it may not be the ultimate antagonist, but there has to be some real conflict in the pilot, or what are you doing?
Был вопрос до этого про основные ошибки начинающих сценаристов, и очень часто одна из ошибок, которые встречаются, это недостаточная оппозиция, недостаточная сила, которая противостоит вашему главному герою. И если вы антагониста выводите за рамки пилота, то вы только ослабляете этот конфликт. Да, наверное, есть варианты, при которых у вас в пилоте действует не основной антагонист, а, допустим, какой-то второстепенный, да, основной подключается дальше по ходу действия. Но ни в коем случае нельзя писать пилот, где вот эта оппозиция, где конфликт совсем слабый и не работающий. То есть будьте осторожны, и если у вас нет конфликта в пилоте, то что вы вообще тогда пишете? Вопрос.
I think we have time for only one more.
Yeah, I think there are like 50 more.
Pick one.
Yeah, okay. Okay, here's the good one, I guess. Вопрос такой. Сейчас часто употребляется термин веб-сериал. Какие отличительные черты от классической драмы вы выделяете? В чем разница с телесериалом, с ТВ-сериалом? People often talk about web series now. What are the specifics of a web series? How is it different from classic drama? And what's the difference with a TV show, with a TV series?
All television now is streaming. And so when you call something a web series, if you're talking about a full-length show, there is no difference. In fact, even traditional networks are now streaming. So all of the same great qualities of great drama work on streaming. And I think that's the entire future. Now, if you're talking about YouTube, that's something else. If you're talking about shorts, that's different.
Mm-hmm. Could you please elaborate a little on the YouTube format?
Okay. If what you really mean are the little 3-minute jokes that are on YouTube or 5-minute shows, those are mainly comedy. They're mostly gags, and they really don't follow the kind of writing we're talking about here. But everything is on the web, and so it's all open.
Важно понимать, что сейчас все сериалы доступны в сети, мы все это видим в интернете, даже если что-то показывается по телевизору, то это становится сразу же доступным через интернет. И в этом смысле отличий нет. То есть сейчас, в принципе, все стало веб-сериалами. Но если вы говорите о коротком формате, который часто мы наблюдаем в YouTube, то есть сериалы, где серия длится 3-5 минут, то там чаще всего эти истории строятся на гэгах, на скетчах, и эти произведения мало, скажем так, имеют отношение к серьезной драме, к тому, о чем мы сейчас говорим, то есть к более продуманным, к более сложным произведениям. So, yeah, I think I have to give a word to Anna right now.
Okay.
She comes back. Thank you very much, Pamela.
Thank
great.
you, Sam.
And you can say a couple of words, to the audience. I will translate.
I wish you all the best of luck. There's a great history in Russian novels and Russian film, and there is no reason that your television can't be on that same high level. So I would say aim high. You can do it.
Хочу в качестве заключительного слова Памела поблагодарила всех, что вы присутствовали на мастер-классе, и сказала, что поскольку в России такая замечательная литературная традиция, поскольку у нас есть такие замечательные фильмы, нет никаких причин, которые бы нас могли остановить на пути к созданию замечательного телевидения. Поэтому ставьте масштабные цели, ставьте значительные цели, цельтесь выше. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Pamela. Анна?
Я хочу поблагодарить, конечно же, Памелу. Это был великолепный мастер-класс, это такая концентрация опыта. И, конечно, хочу поблагодарить Семена Лобашова за этот перевод, за то, что он сегодня сделал, потому что найти такого человека, который с таким опытом и так легко может перевести вот эту вот нашу такую, да, лексику, это очень ценно и очень дорого стоит. И, конечно же, я хотела сказать, что в завершении, у нас есть подарок и новости, и хотела, что важно. Наша школа в этом году сделала невероятное. Мы долго готовились к этому, и мы создали онлайн-программы для обучения. То есть теперь у нас есть не только очное образование, теперь у нас есть еще и онлайн-образование, причем максимально адаптированное для обучения. То есть там фактически, ну, это тоже такой концентрат, к которому мы долго готовились. И основная задача у нас была, конечно же, чтобы наши региональные зрители, вообще люди, которые живут в регионах, могли получить образование профессиональное и создавать кино. И в завершении всего, конечно, я хочу сказать, что те, кто сегодня присутствовал на вебинаре, во-первых, конечно же, приходите на следующую. У нас их планируется еще 11, каждую пятницу, я напоминаю. Более того, если у вас вы грезите, да, кино, вы хотите в этом развиваться, либо у вас уже есть какой-то опыт, вы хотите учиться, приходите к нам в индустрию. У нас сейчас уже идет набор на весну и на очное, и на заочное отделение. И всем, кто был на вебинаре, всем, кто присутствует, включительно до 14 числа, вы можете, до 14 февраля вы можете оставить заявку. Вот где ваше окошко, прямо наверху написано онлайн и очное. И все, кто оставит сегодня, завтра, послезавтра заявки, мы даем 10% скидку на первый семестр. И мы не даем обычно скидки, поэтому это действительно подарок, и в честь вот такого старта, что мы начали, что мы стартанули, что программы готовы, мы вас ждем, мы решили сделать такой подарок. Еще раз благодарю вас, благодарю Памелу, благодарю Семена, благодарю всех, кто участвовал, у нас сегодня было более 1000 человек, и приходите еще, до новых встреч. Спасибо.